Hello and welcome everyone to the Saturday stream. This is our map and image creation, and I'm Josh. So thanks everyone for joining me. This is the stream where we go over all of our art-related stuff, map creation tools, and all of the art side of things inside of Fantasy Grounds Unity. We were kind of cut off short last week. And I want to kind of jump back into that before we get going too much. Today we're actually going to be doing some stuff outside of Fantasy Grounds as well. I've had a lot of requests for the how to implement your own brushes or to even import your own images into Fantasy Grounds and use them in the map creation process. So we're going to go over a lot of that stuff kind of today. I'm going to go over some creation procedures that I do for like the brushes and whatnot, and what I have found that works best inside of the system. And we'll obviously, I do a lot of this kind of stuff. So if I do something that I don't explain properly, or if you're wondering how I accomplish something, please let me know. I'm more than happy to kind of stop and go over anything that we kind of touch on today. But anyway, without too much further ado, let's jump back into, we were creating this fantasy urban environment last time, and we were talking about line of sight, and my microphone, my headset had an issue last week, so we ended the stream without finishing or concluding that kind of stuff. So let's jump back into that. And we were talking about all of the different features, and where we left off were one of the comments was that when using certain occluders in the line of sight, so let's just jump over into here, it actually blocks the image itself, right? So if we were to create a wall around here, so let's just do some little really basic kind of examples here, and I'm actually gonna jump back over in here, and I'm gonna turn these off for the moment. So when we turn it back on, it kind of updates everything. But let's jump in here, and I'll create a new wall layer. And one of the things that I want to talk about here is that there's always, it's a very flexible kind of system inside of Fantasy Grounds, so there are always going to be lots of different ways that you can approach every scenario. But if I were to just take a rectangle, for example, and we were to block out this, and now this is going to block all movement. So each one of these occluders kind of works in different types of ways. And if you guys are unfamiliar with that, I'm happy to go over them. But some of them block movement, some of them block visual capacity in different aspects of that. So there's lots of different types of occluders, and they can be used in lots of different scenarios depending on what you're trying to achieve here. So if I were to do this, and let's just go into the combat tracker here, and I'm going to delete these. Let's grab a new one. We'll drop this guy Bob in there. We only need one entry here, and the reason why we always want to drag from the combat tracker onto the play area here, because this is going to help facilitate all of those different nuances depending on what you're using for a rule system. All of this stuff, many of the features will change based on the rule system itself. So like the built-in lighting dynamics and visual capacities and all of that, those sorts of things. So let's go into our play area here, and I'm just gonna let's turn this stuff back on. We do have some ambient light set up here. So if I grab Bob and I throw him onto and I click on him, because I'm in the player view, I'm going to see what he sees. And you can see that this blocks all of that visual capacity, not only through but from the very beginning, right? So we can't see the building whatsoever. So here we have a wall, and this blocks complete and total interaction with this, and it also blocks all movement. So I can't move through it. What I can do as the DM is I can pick it up with shift, and I can move it on the other side. And you can see now it blocks all of that information from within. So what it does is it completely blocks all movement and visual capacity through these walls of the occluders. Oh, thanks, Fenster. So now let's look at some different ways that we can kind of approach this. So I'm going to just delete my token here. I'm going to turn off all this stuff again. And then I'm going to go back into here and I'm going to remove this wall, right? What I'm actually going to do at this time, and this is what we were talking about last time, is you can use the windows as a kind of movement blocking feature. And we're going to switch over to the terrain here. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing with terrain. And so what terrain actually does is it allows seeing inside but not through, right? So you'll be able to see the building itself, just not what is on the other side of it. However, the terrain occluder does not block movement in whatsoever, right? So imagine this is going to be used for like a bush. And so you're hiding inside of the bush, you're able to see out through all of it. But standing on one side of the bush, you might not be able to see through. You can see the bush itself, but you cannot see the other side of the bush, right? So the walls are kind of set up to be used more for interior environments, like dungeons and whatnot. And some of these other ones I find to be much more useful in our expanded exterior environments. So let's just jump over here and grab Bob again. Excuse me while I have a sip of my coffee. And we can turn this stuff back on. We'll grab Bob, throw him back in here. And the reason why I'm deleting these things is just so that it updates everything properly as we kind of progress here. Because we're going to be changing a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't dynamically change in the middle of play. And so, as you can see here, I can see through this building, right? I can see the building itself, but I cannot see what's on the other side of the building. And this is what we were kind of talking about last time, is that there's always going to be like these visual aspects to the game. And depending on what you want to use from your player's perspective, how much is viable, but you can actually come up with some really cool kind of dynamics here. And I'm actually gonna build out this rooftop so that you can see it a little bit more accurately. So you could see like one side of the roof and not the other side of the roof. And we can actually even kind of do a little bit of a leeway in there. But this will give a good representation of how this works. Now what happens is if Bob climbs up on top here, he can see everything, right? He can see from the rooftop all around. However, this does not block movement. So what we can do is we can set up all these things by using some different occluders together. So let's jump back in here. I'll delete Bob once again. We'll go back into our wall layer here, and I'm going to delete this. We're going to start this over, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off, and I can do it a couple of different ways here, but we'll start off with some rectangles here, right? And what I'll do is I'll create a rectangle. Let's do it something like this, and I like to overlap it slightly here, right? I'm going to do this. I'm just going to do this one roof as like an example here, and then I can grab another rectangle, and I'm going to do it this way. And we'll drop that right in there. And then I'm just going to come in here and clean this up a little bit. We can just grab these. We should probably grab this as well. And then we can just, oh, I guess I didn't grab the other ones. That's all right. And then we can just remove this one. And now what I'll do is I'll switch into my window here, and I'm going to turn off is toggleable. And this will be able to block all movement for me. And I want to make sure that I don't cut out these elements. So what I've done here is I'm using the visual capacity of the terrain, but I'm using the movement blocking of the window layered right on top here. And so what we can do here is you can see now that I have these toggleable elements from the terrain itself, but not the window, because I've turned that off. And let's go back into this play mode here, and I'm going to grab my guy Bob, and you can see what I've done is I've created where he can see partially these particular elements, and this would require a little bit more finagling, I think. But it also blocks all movement. I cannot walk through there. But what I can do is I can grab him as the GM if he wanted to climb up here. And you can see as I move up, it also, when I'm on the peak, I get full visual capacity. When I move on the other side, I'm not going to be able to see because this roof peak will be blocking some of my view, and so on. So you can do lots of really cool and interesting things by using all of these different features in tandem. And I'll just, let's delete Bob here. And that was what I was in the midst of explaining last time when I got cut off. So now that we've concluded that, let's move on here a little bit. So I'm just going to delete this. So hopefully that helps you guys create some more interesting kind of line of sight scenarios inside of your maps there. You can also use the you can kind of put up invisible walls with the thanks, Evo. You can use the line of sight windows as well to create invisible barriers. So if you wanted to, let's say, for example, a bridge or something along those lines where you don't want it to be easily moved off of, you can certainly do that. It can work really, really well. So like if I were going to do something along here and there was a bridge and there was probably something that was going to be underneath like lava or whatever that the players shouldn't be able to move into, especially if you have line of sight set up that it could reveal something or change something, then you can just you can set up everything in it with some barriers there that do not block any of the visual capacity, just the movement capacity. And on the same vein, you can also do things in reverse. You can do ones that block all visual capacity. One of the great ones is the illusory walls, and so this only blocks vision but not movement. So this is great for like curtains or something along those lines, and lots of those things. Oh, well, I'm actually going to be going over that in just a moment, Raven. So if you want to hold on while we just finish up a little bit of the discussion on line of sight, and then we're going to dive right into it. I've actually, that is my plan for the majority of today. So I'm going to go over importing assets just straight up, and all of the different parameters for the painting tools and creating your own elements. Yeah, it should be super fun. And so explaining that stuff, and it'll also give you probably a better insight into how the tools work and what parameters they kind of look for. I'm going to be working in Photoshop today because that's what I primarily work in. That's what I know best. But all of the things that we go over today, it kind of the practices are universal. There's no distinction between which program you should be using. It's just the way that certain things are laid out and the way that certain things are set up for use in this. And I'll give you some good practical kind of information on some ways that you guys can create easy, seamless textures, as well as how you can do a lot of stuff on an easy version. And some of the actual things that I go over today will be specific to Photoshop, though, just because of the way that the tools are set up are probably going to be a little bit different. But the practices, the idea behind them is universal. So anyway, does anyone else have any questions on line of sight or the line of sight features in general before we move on? Oh yeah, I like Krita. I've used Krita a few times in the past. It's a great program. I like it as well. Yeah, so there's a bunch of free programs if anyone is interested, like GIMP or Krita or any number of other ones. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, and feel free if one pops in your head while transitioning here, that's totally okay too. I'm actually going to close this one down. Let's go into our images over here. And I'm just going to create a new image record. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because one of the ways that I like to work inside of Fantasy Grounds is that we're able to update the information. And if you guys are unfamiliar with that, and we're going to get into our assets here in a second, but let's create a new item. And this is going to be our painting test area over here. And we're going to go into our painting section. So let's create a new painting layer. And we can close down our images now. We don't really need that. But let's go into our assets. If you guys have ever noticed, there's this little button down here that says refresh folder assets. And what this will do is anything that we use inside of Fantasy Grounds that is from an exterior source, like in our campaign or in our data folder, we can refresh that, especially if we make changes. So what I'll do is I will have that open in another program, and I can make changes to it and adjustments, refresh that, and it will update things. And I'll give you an example of that. And so a good practice that you can do is to create a base image that you're going to be adjusting and kind of seeing how this works. Now, one of the first things that we're going to be talking about is this stroke feature. And so the brush that we're going to be using for the stroke feature, which is primarily a vertical brush, right? So it's going to be oriented vertically, up and down. And you want it to be seamless from the top to its bottom, right? And then we also have the fill element. We'll be going over that as well. Now, these two features are going to be used in all of these tools with the rectangle and the ellipse. You can see that this doesn't change. But when we go to the stamp, it does change. So this is a kind of a different way that the information is going to be handled by Fantasy Grounds. So if we go back into our line tool here, and this is what we're going to be starting off with, and if you can see, if I just use the regular dot here, right, we can just kind of pull out. What this is doing is it's creating a line based off of just this color alone. So you can actually make plenty of maps and whatnot inside of Fantasy Grounds without ever needing to import any images, right? I've actually gone over this in the past. You can use color fills and line elements and whatnot, so we can make this any color we wish. And you can actually create pretty much anything that you want to inside of Fantasy Grounds. You can even just drag this around and create all of these images and whatnot. We can even come back in and readjust these after the fact with these little points and whatnot. And we can do the same thing with the fill element as well. So if you guys have not seen how to create all of this stuff previously, I suggest that we kind of go back. I'll see if I can find that link to when I've gone over this in the past and get that to you guys. But anyway, the same thing is true if we switch over to a circle here. You can see that when we switch over, we have no fill selected. We just have our stroke. So if I pull this out, it's just going to make an actual ellipse. And we can do this in any size. And again, we can still come back in and we can move individual points if we want to. We can also go into the layers tab and do the whole thing as a whole here. All right, let me grab that. So we can do lots of cool and interesting dynamic changes to this. Yeah, sure. So all of this stuff is very adaptable to anything that you want to kind of create inside of Fantasy Grounds, because all of this is able to be used with images as well. And that's what we're going to be talking mostly about today. We're going to talk about how we can create our own images, import them in, and use them in these tools to be more effective, right? So, and you can really literally pretty much create anything that you want to inside of Fantasy Grounds. There's really no limit to what you can kind of do inside of here. So let's start this off, and I'm just going to demonstrate with an actual brush that's in one of our art packs here. Let's go to the art pack 2019. You can see that we have brushes, and these brushes, as I said before, are set up horizontally. I mean vertically, and so they're in this vertical kind of position. And the reason for that is, let's just grab like this trail brush, right? We'll just drop this in here. So here we have this trail brush, and what this does is it is seamless from top to bottom. So when I drag this out, right, Fantasy Grounds is going to recalculate some of the shapes and whatnot, but it will blend perfectly together here. So this is using exactly the same system as before with just the color, but now what we're actually doing is we're able to draw out an image, and it recalculates some of this stuff so that you can change it. Again, we can go back in here and we can move these things around, and if it gets a little bit too crazy, it does cause some of these little like clipping things, but it's not. It's still quite usable. So the more little points that we kind of create as we move along here, the more adaptable the image kind of becomes. You can see we can move these around and really make pretty much any shape we want to with an image. Now you can see that I'm drawing this way, but our image is that way. We don't want to rotate our image, because what it does is it uses the direction that we're going, thinking that this vertical position is correct here, right? So what I'm doing is now I'm just dragging out and clicking, and I can do exactly the same thing. And we can kind of go around this way. Again, I can grab a rectangle and we can drag that out, or an ellipse, and it's using all of these shapes, but it's using this image and recalculating that image around these corners and doing all of this for us. Let me just delete these. So that's a basic overview of how the stroke system works. Nope, there's no naming convention whatsoever. What we have done is there is a naming convention for easy search access, right? So if you do an underscore and then you add in some of these other elements here, if you can see here, this says a bush, middle brush, and then this is like stonewall brush and so on. So if you do a search for a brush, it'll automatically come up. Yeah, the Wizard Desk, this is what the Wizard Desk theme will look like. I'm still going through some testing with it and making sure that everything is good before it goes live. But yeah, this is what it will be like here shortly. I'm going to be going through all of the different themes and updating them. So be ready for lots of cool looking new ways that you can enjoy Fantasy Grounds. So let's get into the actual process here. And you can see that all of these are going to be exactly the same way. Even if we go into like our tracks, for example. So if we were to grab these tracks, you can see that they're going to be straight up and down here. But I can just kind of draw these out, and they're gonna create some tracks here. That one got a little bit weird, for some reason. Created a lot more things that I needed, but as you can see, it's going to work exceptionally well for just kind of painting out all of these things that we want to do here. Now, that is not to say that you can't use other images in here as well. Let's come up into here and let's go into our decorations. Let me use a rock for an example here. So I'll just grab like this stone, and I can drop this in here. There's no restriction in what you can use inside of these. So you can use lots of different images in lots of different ways, right? So if I want to, I can grab this out and I can make a stone circle really easy. You can see that this one gets cut off a little bit here, and we might need to make an adjustment there or something to kind of get that, but works pretty well. And so you can use a lot of this stuff exactly the same kind of way here, right? So let's go back into here. And again, if we go back up into our brushes, like this stone wall, for example, right? We can draw this out, or we can make all of these things. But if I were to, I don't think that you can rotate this anymore. Yeah, no, so you can't. But if you were to have an image that is, let's say, a stone wall element that was set, I don't think that I have anything along those lines, but if you had it tilted the other way or whatnot, you would get all kinds of weird interactions with the image itself. But that's just like a brief overview of how that system kind of works. So you want to make sure that you maintain the stroke element up and down there. So let's get into making our own here. The first thing that I'm going to do here, right, is I'm going to go into, you can go into your campaign or your data folder. And the difference between these two folders is one is across all your rule sets, right? This is in your base image folder, and your campaign is specific to this campaign that you're creating, right? So if we're doing this inside of here, this is just images that are contained within my streaming campaign that I have set up in Core RPG, right? And if I go down to this folder button and I click this, you'll see I get a pop-up. And this has all of these images, right? And this is where we can store these particular images that we're going to be working with. So you guys can come in here, and it even handles folders, as you can see here. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll put in test elements in here when I'm creating map elements and whatnot. And so you can see that this comes from my Fantasy Grounds, and I'm in the test channel campaigns, and this is my stream campaign, and this is the images. So right inside of here, I can save any image that I want to. And once I hit this update button, even with this running, it'll pop right up in here. Well, you think so? The comment is from Aaron that I think one of the biggest disconnects initially is the fact that the behavior is not familiar with how the tool manipulates the brushes, shapes, and tiles. Well, hopefully, when we go over this, you'll see that it is pretty natural. And I probably am not, because I've been using it for so long, it seems second nature to me. But if there is a particular type of aspect that you think is a big disconnect, please let us know, like the orientation of the image or so on. We're always open for any sort of feedback. Great. So now what I'm actually going to do is jump over, and what we'll talk about here is, and this is one of the reasons why, let's go into our grid system. And our grid system works with all this other stuff. So it's all works in tandem together, right? So I'm going to make this 100 by 100 grid. Oh, let me make sure that my numlock is on. And I'm going to turn this down so that we can see it, but it's not too intrusive there. And what we can do is, now when we come over here, right, what we can see is this is 3.1 wide. That means squares. This is 15.3 tall, right? And if we reset this is going to be very small. But I think that the initial should be, yeah, something like this. So it's going to be 1 square wide, as you can see here, and 5 square tall. That's one instance of this image, right? So as I adjust this image size, I'm doing that by holding Control and using my mouse wheel, I can actually see these change in relationship to the squares. Now, if I go back into the grid system and I change that, you'll see that these numbers also change. And what that means is that it uses the grid system, and that's why the image fidelity is independent of how it's displayed on the screen, because it's actually using the grid system to display it. So it's very advantageous for us in the creation process. And that's going to be true across all of this image stuff. So what I like to do, and what this actually means is 100 by 100, is it's naturally 100 pixels by 100 pixels. And so I can translate that very easily in the creation process, right? So when I switch over here to, let's go to Photoshop here. And let's make a new image. And we're going to make this, I can make this, I'm going to make it 200 wide, and we'll make it 500 tall. And that will be, and if I turn on I have this grid system that's already set up for me. And what that means is that's going to be 2 grid squares wide at 100 by 100 and 5 grid squares tall. Well, you don't have to have the great thing about the grid system, Aaron, if you're unaware of that, is that the grid system can be completely altered by you to fit the images that you're bringing in. So if you have like something that has a pre-designed grid square on it, you can match it up effortlessly in Fantasy Grounds. It's very, very easy. And that's one of the great advantages that you have here. And what Fantasy Grounds actually does, it's really smart in the way that it handles a lot of that stuff. And what it will do is it is smart enough to know if you have exported the XML files correctly or set things up correctly, that it'll know what size it's supposed to be, regardless of how you change the grid. But what we're talking about right now is setting up initially so that we have a good understanding of how it's going to work inside of Fantasy Grounds. But if you bring in some other image, you can adapt it very easily. I might even, like, let's say, for example, like this. So we'll create this new image record. This is, I think, a map from Salt Marsh, right? And here, this is, who knows what size this is or what size these grids are. We can come right in here and we can actually use our mouse and drag out this grid square and match it up. And then we can nudge it if we need to, or change its dimensions and whatnot. You can see that this is a little bit off here, so we can just come in and do any of the adjustments that we want to. We can move it around and change things. It looks like it's probably going to be like 26.2 or something. And you say, boom, we have just matched that up pretty well for that hand-drawn thing. So you don't really need to worry about that too much. Yeah, yeah. There's always going to be lots of different ways that you can kind of approach all these kind of scenarios here. All right, well, let's I'm going to go back into Photoshop over here, and here we have an image, and what we're going to be doing with this is we're actually going to I don't know why this is, all right. Change this a little bit. What we're actually doing here is creating a brush image for ourselves, right? And what I'll do oftentimes is I'll use my own grid system that I set up on the image itself to help me maintain whatever it is that I'm trying to control here, right? And one of the things that you want to keep in mind if you're creating your own brush image that's going to be used in our stroke element is that you want to have a decent length compared to its width, right? If it's too wide and too short, it'll get distorted more as it tries to calculate around corners and whatnot. So, and this is what I usually do is I do it, if I'm going to be doing something that's going to be one square across, I'll originally create the image a little bit wider so I have some room to kind of mess around with in case I need it. And I can always trim it down or shrink it down later. But there's lots of different ways that you can kind of approach this creation method. So let's say, what's a good idea? What do you guys want to do for a brush? What would you guys like to see created here? Anything in mind that you would like we could do? No, I usually paint them. I'm going to be doing everything with a mouse today because I want everything that's going to be easily replicated. But I actually, what I do is I draw a lot of the stuff out first, and then, and I work in Photoshop, so I create a lot of like custom brushes and whatnot, and paint out elements. But when we get to the fill elements, I'll show you. I'll show you how I kind of maintain continuity and making everything seamless. Sure, we could do barbed wire. That would be pretty simple to do. We actually, if you look at, I can kind of give you an example of something similar to that. If we go into the spell templates, let's go to spell templates. We have some brushes in here. And here we have like this wall of thorns that we created, or I created a long time ago. And again, it's the same kind of scenario there. You see we have what it is basically an image that matches up with itself from top to bottom so that we can kind of draw this out into any shape that we want it to. We could do that exactly the same way. Well, it completely depends on what you're trying to create, and one of the things that you can kind of do, because the system is independent of pixels, really, it's really independent of pixel size. But this gives us a general idea. I usually set my grids to 100 by 100, and what we can actually do is kind of mimic that, right? So what this is going to be is this is 500 pixels tall and 200 pixels wide, this image that we're going to be creating. But we'll probably end up narrowing it down to 100 by 5. All right, so what we can do here, and let me just, we can do this a couple of different ways. Yeah, let's do, what we want to do is we want to maintain, as I said before, it's got to match up at the top and at the bottom, right? So we can do this a couple of different ways and see what's going to work out for us, right? So if we're going to do something like barbed wire, we can do something that's kind of straight, right? So let's do that. We'll do a straight version, and then we can do one that's a little bit more. Lots of different movement to it and whatnot, right? So what I'll actually do is we'll do this like really simply first, and like I said, I'm going to be doing this all just with my mouse. So this will be a little bit trickier for me than I'm usually used to. Let's set this over here, and I'm just going to fill this little element in like this. And I use a lot of shortcut keys. I don't know if any of you guys are going to be using Photoshop or not, but this is how we're going to be doing it here. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to narrow this down a little bit. Yeah, that should be pretty good. And what I'll do is I'm going to create, let's see here. Let's maximize this so I have a little bit more workspace here. And we'll go into our brushes. And I have lots and lots of different brushes. I think I have this angular kind of brush here, which will be good, I think, for trying to create these other things. So I'm going to create a new layer here. And I'm just going to make a very simple barbed wire here. Maybe something like this. And we'll just clean this up a little bit here. We want a little bit of angular. Yeah, something like this. And we can duplicate this and just repeat it a couple of times down here. Great. So now that we know that this is going to match up, so this is just like a very basic kind of example here. Now let's make these all the same layer here, and we'll actually use some built-in features here. Let's do this beveled element here, and what we're actually going to do is something like that. And let's zoom in here a little bit so we can see how this is kind of going to function here. Normally, I would just like paint on this, but using a mouse, we'll have to adjust this a little bit, and we'll soften this out a little, and that's going to give us a little bit of shape to our piece here. And we can do the same thing here. We can actually copy this layer style and paste it in here. Except we're going to change the angle of this a little bit and the size. Make it more like this. And we can actually change this a little bit too, so that it's a little bit less, we get a little bit more of the shadow on there. And what I'm actually going to do is let's combine all this together. So we have our really basic kind of image here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hold down Shift so I maintain my continuity of this. And I'm going to bring it all the way down to like here. Wait. Oh, I didn't quite do it far enough. Hold on. I need to bring it to here. And then we can bring it to here, and that is one strand of barbed wire. And now we're going to save that right into Fantasy Grounds here. Hold on. And we'll go right into our Fantasy Grounds, and we'll go into our campaign here. And you can see here's all of those images. You could also just save this somewhere else and then drag and drop it into that folder that we have open there. And we'll call this just B-Wire. And boom, now it is saved directly in there. And if we go to our campaign folder here and we hit refresh, we're going to see it right here. There is our barbed wire. And now we can kind of test this out in here. And now what I'm actually going to do is we have this folder that's right here. I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to open with, so I have this particular image opened up in my Photoshop. And what I can actually do here is make adjustments to this in real time if need be. Hit that little refresh button and anything that I've painted with that will also update. So what we can actually do here is go back into our painting tab here. You can see here's our new barbed wire. And I can draw this out. can come in here and we can move this around. So perhaps I want to like change any sort of these aspects on here that I wish. I can now do that in real time. Let's grab maybe a circle. We have this. Now let's go back into our element over here. And let's, maybe we're going to change our, we're going to increase this, and maybe we'll put outline on it. And as we save this now, we can come back in here, hit our refresh button, and you can see it has completely updated inside of the program as well. So we can use this as a way of testing everything that we are kind of creating here. Yeah, sure. Well, usually what I would actually do is in the creation process, I would be drawing it out. So doing it with a mouse is going to be a little bit trickier. But we can also go back if we decide that we didn't want to do it that way. Maybe we just want to put the stroke on it without doing any sort of adjustments here. And we can save that. Again, we can come back in here, do this, and there we go. We have a quick little easy way that we've created our own brush without having to do too much effort, right? Now let's say we want to make an additional kind of element here, right? We can come in here and we can do we can use this as our base, and we can begin to build off of this. And so if we want to create like I did with the like the other elements, maybe we want to add like a little bit of a waviness to this or whatnot. Let's rasterize this so that we don't have to deal with that, and we'll hit Control T. I can warp this inside of Fancygrounds, so I could, inside of Photoshop, so I could change some of these parameters or whatnot. Or we could even do, let's see. I think that this would be better if we did it if we rotated it first. And now we can, let's do this, and we can go up to some of these default ones like this, and we can add a little bit of a wave to it. And you can see that this is maintaining all through there. So let's do that. And then we're going to want to rotate our image back. And then we can do this. And you can see that this will add a natural kind of waviness to it. So the world is of this kind of creation process is rather dynamic. As you can see, you'll run into some different kind of issues as you begin to manipulate that, which is why I tend to, and if we keep it like this, I tend to do the creation of these, like if I want to do like a wave or something, or I do it with the actual elements themselves rather than the image. I found that works much better. Do you guys have any questions about that so far? It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, it would be a great western or farm fence line for sure. Yeah. Also inside of this, we have some end cap and some corner types So if we wanted to do rounded corners and rounded end caps, for example, so what that does is it brings out some of the edge a little bit. And we could have more rounded kind of edges on our corners and whatnot. Now, this is not limited to anything simple either. You can do this with very advanced images and create lots of really cool kind of elements. But that's the basic concept of the brush system and how it works. Now let's switch over and talk about the fill elements. So the fill elements work in a completely different way. Let's turn this off, and I'll turn on my fill element. Again, you can see that the default is going to be just this color field. And the color field is, if I were to come out here, I can draw out any shape I want to. And this is still going to use the same points as before, but this is going to draw out a particular a filled shape. And if I use an image in there, I want to make sure that it's an image that is something that is seamless, a seamless texture, which means that on all four of its directions will match up with the opposing direction, right? So the top will match up with the bottom, the right will match up with the left, and so on. And if we go into some examples here of fills, let's go back into the 2019 map pack. And all these tiles are all seamless here, except for the ones that are transitionary ones. But if we were to go into, let's say, this one, and let's go back into our painting tab here, and I can drag and drop this over here. We can draw out any shape that we want to with this texture in here. I'm going to delete this and create a new one. So as you can see here, here is our texture in here. This has a whole other edit fill tab where we can move this around. We can rotate it and scale it. We can also change the RGB values and alpha values. We can fade in the edges. We can do all sorts of things from inside this. So the fills themselves, and the fills and the oh yeah, well, good, Raven. I hope that this will help a lot of people kind of understand the system a little bit easier. But yeah, so and these all work in tandem too. You can have these both on at once, right? So what basically this would be is you can create an edge element for the fill element as well and have them work together, right? Like, so this could be a wall and a floor. And so you can draw out. And one of the cool things about this is we have this add feature, subtract feature, and so on. So what that means is that this will add to this. You can create new shapes. We can even switch over to the rectangle, and this will all add together to create a single shape. And if I want to, I can even go to the subtraction element here, and I can remove things from the middle and so on. And so we can create pretty much any shape that we want to inside of Fantasy Grounds, and using all of these elements together or independent of each other. Yeah, yeah, Unity is a completely different world than Classic was. You're absolutely correct. So there is a lot going on here. Now, when we go into our creation process for a fill element, we just want to think about things in a little bit of different terms. Whereas with our stroke, our brush element, we only have to worry about it being seamless from top to bottom. But with our fill element, we want it to be seamless across, right? We want it to be in every direction seamless. And a really easy way to do that is to, well, we'll get into that in a moment. But is everybody pretty clear about how this functionality works and how it all works together here? And again, I can still come back into this area. I can move this around. I can scale this, and I can rotate it. And I could change its alpha, so it's more or less transparent, as well as its colors. And all this is done after the fact, right? Once we've even placed it. I can even fade this in, so we get a nice fade from this to the edge element as well. Oh, good. Well, if you guys have any questions, or if I do something that you're not quite sure what I did, just let me know. I'm more than happy to explain as we kind of progress here. So I'm just going to delete all this stuff. And let's move in and start to create a fill element. So what kind of fill do you guys think would be good? And again, you can do all of this stuff, right? You don't need to have, we can go back to our painting elements here, right? Let's make this black. Or we can make it like that old school, like blue or whatever. And then you can actually create an entire, let's change our miter corners and make sure we have a new element here. And I'm going to hold down control and that'll snap to the grid. So you could build out walls and whatnot. Now we switch to an add and we can do this. And you can make your maps inside of Fantasy Grounds without ever needing to use any art packs whatsoever. So never think that it's a necessary kind of element, because if you wanted to then draw more stuff in here, all you do is you turn off your fill and you have your stroke, and then you can just kind of, we want to make sure that we have a line element selected here, and let's go back to that. And you can still draw in all of this different stuff and whatnot. So you have the freedom to create whatever you want inside of Fantasy Grounds, even without any sort of image assets. But going back into our painting stuff here, let's go back into our image paint. Well, let's turn this off actually. Turn this back on. In the creation process for this, what kind of fill do you guys think that we should be making here? And what I'm actually going to do, let's do create a new image, and I'm going to make this. Well, we'll just make it 500 by 500. Anyone have any suggestions or anything that they'd like to see made? I can actually, one of the things that might be kind of a good demonstration here is we'll just do some sort of textured. I'll just do this. We'll just grab a texture element here, something like this. And we'll make sure it's black. And I'm just going to stamp in this texture. This will be a good demonstration on how we can create a seamless element from something. And so if you guys have like a picture or perhaps something, and this is a quick and easy way that you can kind of go through that, right? So here we have just this nice texture. I'm actually going to duplicate it to make it a little bit darker, and we'll combine that together. So here we have, this is just like some sort of texture here. Now let's save this immediately into our Fantasy Grounds area here. And we'll make sure it's a PNG, and we'll just call this test fill. Well, this is going to be a fill element. The tiling system is a little bit different, and we can go into that too today as well. But we're just talking about just the painting tools right now. So now I'm going to open this up. So I have this actual image all ready to go inside of my my image creation system, right? So if you're using anything else, you just want to make sure that that's the image that you have opened up. And I can go back into Fantasy Grounds now, and let's refresh this. Go into my campaign, and there it is. It's right here. Now, if I drag and drop this into my fill element right now, and I drag out a section, you can see that this is not seamless at all. We have a lot of texture here, but it is not. And I'm actually going to go into my edit fill area over here, and I'm going to use Control on my mouse wheel to scale this up so I have a better kind of vision of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my image creation software, right? And this is 5 by 5. So I'm going to hit Control T, and I am going to bring this down to halfway, right? Which is 2.5 by 2.5. And then I'm going to hit Control J and duplicate that, flipped it. And this is a quick and easy way to create something that is seamless. Now you're going to get some weird replicating stuff in here, but you'll see now that I save this and we hit that refresh, maybe it's not done saving. Oh yeah, it is. Oh, maybe we have to close it down for our yeah, fills. You might have to close down and reopen. Now we have a seamless texture. You can see that this doesn't have any sort of resemblance of what it was originally. So this is not always going to work for you. But if we go back into our painting, and here we can see we have all of that stuff. But this could work really, really well if you're doing particular types of elements here. So the tiling system actually works inside of the Layers tab, which here we have our tile stamp and so on. So this is a different kind of system than our painting system. But here, well, I didn't want to draw all that stuff on there. Make sure you always have the correct tool selected. And again, with our rectangle painted in here, we can move these around independently, and you can add all kinds of cool stuff in here. So if we were to do this with something that is like a floor tile or something along those lines, grounds and whatnot, you can easily kind of do that. So we'll move these, snap it to the grid. Excuse me. So you guys have any questions on any of that and how that functionality works? So some examples of some things that I have I've done in here. So if we go like, maybe it's, let's just type in fill and see what we got here. We have lots of different types of fill elements from stones and dirt. Different pattern for tiling. We have woods. Different types of floor elements. Roofing. Shells. Scales. More roof elements and so on. But I believe it's in the interior, the modern interior. Oh, this is industrial. Yes. So you could take something that is like a carpet like this, and you can kind of create anything that you want to from this. And we've kind of done this in the past, and it's good to use like a stroke with it too, because you can actually create like images that look. So you can drag in like a fill element, and let's do round corners. And so you can actually build out. We've actually built a couch before doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You can actually build out. I've gone over this a few times, um, building out elements here. So let's close this down and kind of jump over into some other stuff here. So let's see here. Yeah, here we go. This is one we did just a little while ago. And what we actually did here, so this is just a wall that is the stroke element and a floor. We did some other kind of stuff in here as well, but if we also did exactly the same thing with a different tile set. And then this was our base is seems to the update might have changed that a little bit. It's all still here, just not really there. But here we actually created all of this, several different iterations of it. So let's get out of that mode. And so how you can quickly create these, we did all of these in one session without a problem. So you basically, what we've done is creating a few painting layers and done a lot of adjustments. Very easy to do. Now you can do this exact same thing too with static images, and we can use that inside of our stamp tool as well. So you can grab a static image and drop it in your stamp tool. What that does is it places a single instance of that. So let's go into like a decoration, like this boat, for example. And when I click, it'll just place this single image down. Again, I can go back into my edit area here and I can move these to wherever I wish. However, I do not have any control over its order or rotation after the fact. So using all of these different elements together, we can come up with some very cool kind of environments. And none of this is set in stone, right? You can use any image in any area here. So if I wanted to grab this guy and stamp in some of these, I can. Or this. So everything is completely interactable in every scenario. All right, you guys have any other questions on that? Seems pretty straightforward, right? All right, well, if no one has any questions, I'm going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll start building a new map. And if we happen to run into something where we wanted to create a new asset, then we certainly can. All right, so just hang out, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to stretch my legs for a minute and refresh my beverages, and then we'll get back at it. So, well, that's a good question. That's a good question. So let's look at some of the like tile sets, right? So usually, and this is one of the reasons why you might use a tile over a painted element. There are pros and cons for both, depending on what you're trying to do. One of the things that I like is that the painted element painting is much more flexible. Yeah, right. So let's say, for example, I'm just going to use some color fills here. And if we were to begin to build out like a dungeon, for example, we might even want to make this a little bit bigger here. Make our stroke a little bit larger so we can kind of see this. But let's say we're building out our dungeon and we start to, we want to make sure that we're in the add functionality here. So it all kind of goes together here. And we're building out our dungeon. Let's say we're making some rooms and some hallways and whatnot, right? Now all I have to do is go into my line of sight, and you can see we have this duplicate paint layer as walls, and we just go boom, and all of our line of sight is all done for us. So we can paint it out, we can do everything we want to, and generate all of our line of sight. If we have to come in and make any adjustments, we can certainly do that as well, because this puts it on a separate layer. However, let's say I think I have some Pathfinder tile sets in here, right? So these are tile sets, and if we were to drag and drop one of these over here, right, you can see that this creates its own little layer over here, and we can do this. Now included in this is also the line of sight. Looks like that is maybe not right. I don't know. But all of this stuff can be worked into. If we go over into this tab over here, we have our tile settings, right? So you can put in a default tile, and you can just start to snap these into place. And you can build these out as well. And let's see, we got, I guess we can do, I don't really know these tiles very well, but whatever, we try some stuff out here. Whoops, we want to grab this one. So you can build these out as well. These should have included in them, it looks like that one particular tile is a little bit wonky, but included in them is going to be a lot of the other elements to it. This can also include lighting setup and all kinds of other things. So it depends on your inside of this workspace, there is any number of different ways that you can kind of approach every scenario. So whatever, I prefer the painting because it's more flexible. It allows me a lot more control over what I'm trying to do, and I'm doing my own creative process. Inside of tile sets, you can kind of do it in any number of different ways, right? You can, depending on the tile set itself. So this can include a lot more pre-built-in information, basically. Whereas the other one you'll have to add in like lighting and whatnot yourself. But that's not to say that these are always going to have those kind of things put in there. But yes, For me, painting is much more flexible. Hopefully that answers your question. Because I think that in all actuality, if we go, I think that tile sets are great for certain elements and whatnot. But I really think that you can create very compelling looking dungeons, and this is all done just with painting. Correct. So, well, um, a couple of different elements to that. Yeah, so basically, yes, there can be some pre-built. So let's say if there were torches on the wall and whatnot, they could have lights attached to them and so on. And that information, when it's dragged and dropped in, will come with it, including like line of sight and whatnot. But in an element like this, for example, I can just go into my line of sight, and if I have all my walls set up, I literally just have to hit a button, as you can see here, and it will generate all of my line of sight anyway. So I don't, if you're painting out the stroke element, you can use that stroke element to create all of your line of sight. So there is some benefit to doing this, especially if you just want to like drag and drop some elements. But if you want to be able to have control over, but you can use these in tandem too, right? Like you can have a drag and dropped element on your playing field here. Let's go. Let's see if we can find one that has a bit more. So let's say one of these, as you can see here, has all kinds of different types of line of sight attached to there, right? And if we go into painting tab, we could paint elements right on top of this and augment this as well. Maybe we'll go to, let's go. Let's see, what do we have over here? There we go. There's a skeleton. Grab that guy. And then we come over here, boom, paint a skeleton right on top. So you can mix and match the two together and create some interesting new elements. It's more along the lines of what you like best and how you like to Great. Well, I'm going to take a short break really quickly. I just want to heat up my coffee and get another glass of water. And then I'll be right back, and then we'll start. We'll dive into some new image creation. And if we run into any issues from now on, maybe we'll jump over and make our own images that we might be able to use in particular areas. So that'll be a neat new workflow element that we can add into the stream. All right, well, everyone just hang out for a moment, and I will be right back. All right, and I'm back. I think I forgot to switch the splash screen, but we're good to go. Thanks everyone for hanging out, waiting for me to return. So, what kind of map should we begin to create now? Or we could continue in our creation process. Let's remove this. We don't need this. We could continue to work on our fantasy urban environment if you guys wanted to. Thinking about building a little bit of an area down here. We also I would like to enhance the shadows in this a little bit. So here's a good example of something that I created a long time ago, which I use very much. It's just this image that is this gradient. And this is, I find, particularly useful. Create a new painting layer. And I'm going to paint in some of these. I'm going to do this intentionally darker. And if you guys have a suggestion for a different map, please let me know. I'm going to do like a couple of large ones here. I'm doing this intentionally darker so that I can adjust it a little bit more on the layer tab. I like these larger kind of ambient shadows and painting them in. So now what I can actually do is with this on its own separate layer, I can go to my layers tab, and this is going to be on a per layer basis, and I can just lower down the opacity a little bit. And I'll do some more of these little incidental kind of shadows that will be more prevalent in some of these areas. We might even want to do something. We can turn off our aspect lock ratio, and we can make it wider than it is tall. Do some of these kind of oblong shapes. Ooh, Call of Cthulhu? That sounds fun. I've always wanted to play it, but I've never had the chance. And drop this in here. Yeah. You can see if we turn this off, you can see how much that adds to it. Very cool. And then down here, we'll do like a little square. You know what I think I'll do is let's do some, let's make this a little bit wider as well. Create all these little incidental kind of shadows here. Might even want to do some for some of these like bushes. Let's open up our assets.